We are live.
So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Historic Districts Review Board. Today, we are September 24th, 2024. And may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. We have Member Mather.
Here.
Member Bescheid. Here. Member Degnan.
Here.
Member Aguilar Madrano. Here. Member Benvenu.
Here.
Vice Chair Guida. Excused. Member, Madam Chair Rios.
Here.
You have a quorum, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Any changes to the agenda?
Chair Rios, yes. Under new business, item A, 2024-009042 HDRB for 645 Garcia Street has been postponed. And item B, 2024-009045 HDRB 636 Garcia, Unit 2 and 3 has been withdrawn.
Bill's on, okay. Any further changes?
No, Madam Chair.
Not, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as just amended.
Aguilar Madrano so moves.
Bescheid seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Mather.
Yes.
Member Bescheid.
Yes.
Member Benvenu.
Yes.
Member Aguilar Madrano.
Yes.
Member Degnan. Madam Chair, your motion has passed.
Thank you very much. We do not have minutes on this agenda, so we'll move on to the findings of fact and conclusions of law. We have two in reference to June 11th, 2024, changes to either one of these. Board members. If not, a motion, please.
Aguilar Madrano moves to approve the findings of fact and conclusion of law for June 11th, 2024, items A and B on the agenda.
Second. A roll call, please.
Member Mather.
Yes.
Member
Yes.
Bescheid.
Yes.
Member Benvenu.
Yes.
Member Degnan.
Yes.
Member Aguilar Madrano.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the findings have passed.
Thank you very much. And then we have three under June 25th, 2024. Any changes, board members or staff? It appears not. Motion, please.
Beachside moves to approve the findings of fact and conclusions of law for the meeting on June 25th, 2024, items C through E on the agenda.
Mather seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Madrano.
Yes.
Member Degnan.
Here.
Member Benvenu. Member Bescheid.
Yes.
Member Mather.
Yes.
Madam Chair, those findings have been
Thank you. And we have one for July 9th, 2024. Motion, please. Anyone?
Bienvenu moves to approve the minutes of July 9, 2024.
Mather seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Just to confirm, Member Benvenu, you said minutes, that is
I'm
findings?
sorry, the findings of fact, conclusions of law.
Thank you. Member Mather.
Yes.
Member Bescheid.
Abstain?
Member Benvenu.
Yes.
Member Aguilar Madrano.
Yes.
Member Degnan.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the findings have been approved.
Thank you very much. Before we go to matters from the public, I would like to get something clarified, and I thought the city attorney was going to be here. We do have the assistant city attorney, Mr. Rubali. Oh, hi. Normally, we have you sit over there. No, she's like, I know. Okay, so I have a question in reference to the item that is before us this tonight. I need clarification in reference to the particular item. Did you just want comments from the board, or will we be entertaining comments from the public? And clarification number two, is this in reference to the feasibility of the city council that's going forward on their motion? And if I'm stating anything incorrectly, please correct me. So are we, the H board, commenting on the feasibility of the resolution that is before the city council that I believe that they are going to act on tomorrow night. And that, of course, has to deal with the obelisk. And do we also incorporate into that the possibility of moving the obelisk from the plaza location and perhaps not even indicating that it's being moved, that the possible location will be the National Cemetery? Have I stated all that correctly or no?
Chairwoman Rios, commission, board members, I suppose, in this case. My name is Erin McSherry. I've met many of you before, sometimes in other contexts. Good to see you, Commissioner, or Board Member Mather. So I'm here tonight as staff for a piece of legislation. And the reason it came before or is on your agenda is that the governing body referred the legislation to advisory committees for comment, feedback, really beyond the fact that you're reviewing it, they didn't give anything more specific than that. So you can provide specific advice or recommendations about it of any type. And there are a bunch of amendments that have been requested. I think we're at G or further, probably H or I at this point, A through I. Only one of which has been voted on at this point, and a few others were discussed last night in the Finance Committee. We anticipate that the rest will be discussed tomorrow night. So I personally I'm not asking for something in particular about this legislation, but the governing body at the time of introduction can add committees to the review. So they added the Arts Commission, they added the H Board, they added the Veterans Advisory Committee, and all three council committees are part of the review as well. So there are 6 different city committees that are looking at this legislation and providing feedback. We've had at least one advisory committee provide like an official statement that they voted upon. One advisory committee just each decided to provide individual comments and let their comments be reflected in the minutes. And then, yes, you are the third advisory committee. And then the 3 council committees, one council committee adopted one amendment. I think the first council committee adopted it before there were amendments proposed. And then last night's council committee moved the legislation forward without recommendation because they knew there was a lot of amendments that were being introduced, and they wanted to be, at least one counselor expressed an interest in seeing all of those amendments before making a specific motion about how to move the legislation forward and whether to adopt amendments, because there were more coming that hadn't been presented yet.
Okay, and for the benefit of us and the public, please restate exactly what we are going to be addressing this evening.
Sure. So, and the counselor is going to present her legislation to the board, and she'll start off that the substantive presentation, but the request is for review of the legislation and any sort of advice that you would like to give to the governing body about that legislation. So to distinguish, and for anyone who follows the H board, this is very distinct from a case, which is a quasi-judicial proceeding. This is a piece of legislation. It is not a case. There are not parties. I don't know if this board has a procedure for listening to legislative matters. Some of the boards and committees do public comments, some do not. I'm not sure if you have a practice established already in relation to that, but it isn't like a quasi-judicial matter where you have sworn testimony and where it had to be noticed or anything like that.
So in the end, we can either have individual comments submitted from each board member, or did you want us to make a motion in reference, if the board is indicating that they're leaning in one direction, and most of the board is leaning towards one specific recommendation, would that be appropriate to make a motion? And
Chair Rios, you certainly could make a motion about whatever the advice is that you would like to give. And it would only be the board's advice if you do make a motion.
And also, very important, there are a lot of people here in the public that probably wish to comment. Will we be taking public comment in reference to the item, or do we take it under matters from the public? Or right? I mean, I think it's going to weigh in about the same.
Sure, Chair, so I don't know what your standard practice would be for something that's not a case, so I would just recommend that you follow your practice in relation to anything where you're not making a quasi judicial determination.
Okay, thank you. Just a minute. Board members, do any of you have questions at this time? Or Attorney McClure? No? Okay. So what I think that I will do is that I will receive public comment right before we start the discussion that is before us this evening, okay? So if anyone, I'll move on to the next thing on the agenda, which is matters from the public. Matters from the public, if you have anything other than in reference to the item that we're going to be talking about, the obelisk, if you have anything this evening on your agenda to talk to us about H-Board matters. If anyone in the public here wants to step forward to the podium, come now. It appears not. Is anyone on Zoom? And who will be checking that this evening? Gary, is anyone on Zoom?
No, Madam Chair.
And do we have anything under staff communications?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
And you already settled the new business. We have nothing under that except for our discussion item, which we all know we're going to be talking about the obelisk this evening. Board members, I feel that we need to get public comment before we comment. And that's, if anybody has any objections to that or has something better to recommend, let me know now. If not, I will ask for public comment. And as I understood, City Attorney McSherry, she said you do not have to get sworn in because this is not a quasi judicial matter. So all of you that are going to speak, you can line up or come forward now and please state your opinions. Yeah, please come forward. Don't be afraid to speak right into that mic.
Okay, Stephanie Beninato. I used to want the obelisk reconstructed with some contextual plaques or something like that. I used it as a teaching moment on my tours. However, I think it's become very divisive, and I'm not sure what's left. What I like about this resolution is that it is a study that will require the city to let everyone know that they actually own the obelisk, and then they actually have the authority to move it unilaterally, that is, without anybody else's consent. And you also know if it actually can be moved, which would maybe change the conversation totally. If you cannot move it, I really think at this point, we should just take the box down and see what's there and put it all in context, put context around it, 1896 all the way around. Here's now the contemporary history. Here's what happens when there's division and I'll say just disrespect in a community. And unfortunately, this happened in Santa Fe, but it is part of our ongoing messy history. And maybe that's what we should do with it. But again, I like the idea of the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board. My name is Larry Good, 721 Garcia Street. I am an architect and urban planner serving as the chairman of Historic Santa Fe Foundation. For 155 years, the Soldiers Monument has served to mark the center point of our city. The problem with the Soldiers Monument is not its obelisk form, nor its location in the center of the plaza. The offensive panel should be removed when that obelisk is restored. The obelisk as a form has an origin in ancient Egypt. It's a 3,000-year-old history marking places of importance. Examples are Place de la Concorde in Paris, our own Washington Monument on the National Mall, and the obelisk at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. The symbolism of obelisks through the years are as follows: creation and rebirth, unity and harmony, strength and immortality, effort, success, and achievement. If the Soldiers Monument in its unvandalized form were still standing in the center of our plaza, this board would vigorously guard against its relocation. Only now, after being vandalized by outsiders, is this resolution on our council agenda. I strongly encourage the board to express non-support of that resolution and give that advice to the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good evening. My name is Philip Crump. I reside at 1897 Conejo Drive. I'm a former president of the Old Santa Fe Association. I've been a resident of Santa Fe for 35 years and New Mexico for 55 years. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, also known as Memphis down in Dixie. In Memphis, there was a Confederate Park, Jefferson Davis Park, Forest Park with a larger-than-life equestrian statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the slave owner and the leader of the massacre at Fort Pillow. I think people are not aware of the danger that the West of the United States faced with the Confederate assault. The plan to capture the gold fields in Colorado and march to California and create the Southwest as a slaveholding area. The Soldiers Monument was created to commemorate those who fell, most of whom were New Mexican, in the battle at Glorieta and the other battles down south to prevent the advance of slavery in the Southwest. I also urge the board to reject this resolution and recommend that the Soldiers Monument with its obelisk be restored so that we can honor those who saved our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. My name is Frank Katz. I live at 1300 Canyon Road in Santa Fe. First thing I want to report, I am a member of the Old Santa Fe Association now, and the Old Santa Fe Association has reviewed this issue, and by a vote of the board has just urged this board and the city council to restore the monument itself, the obelisk, to put it back in the center of the plaza where it belongs, and to work through language to replace the offensive language on the north plaque. I very much agree with that. I think we're not that far from what a lot of people would like, both here on the board. And I think that there needs to be 3 steps. The first step is to restore it. I don't think there's any question it has to be restored. The second question is to work on the wording for the panel for the that north panel, to remove that and try to express our honest history. No one comes out of this guiltless. The word savage Indians that was on the panel originally was put on the panel shortly after the savage United States Army marched the Indians from the where they were living to the Bosque Redondo, and thousands died. They were injured. That's just as savage as anything anyone else does. I think we need to express our history honestly. And I think when that is done, it needs to be put back where it's belong. The Santa Fe Plaza is registered with the federal government, the National Preservation folks, and to say that the monument is not part of the plaza when it is the most outstanding part of it, it's been there for such a long time. It is geographically the center of the city, and there's been discussion about how, well, that's why it has, the plaza has historic status, because it's geographic is what counts. Well, that is what the location in the center of the plaza is all about. I would hope that this board would take a strong position. This is the board for the preservation of Santa Fe and the history, to have the monument restored to the plaza. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Hello, my name is Pat Lillis. I live at 2119 Conejo Drive. And I won't repeat what all these wonderful people have said. I would also like to urge you to restore vote to restore the monument to the plaza. During the 70s and 80s, I worked downtown, and I always found it to be a beautiful stone anchor in times when the plaza looked kind of shabby, the grass was dead. I always loved it. I also am a little confused about the relocation. I'm hoping you all received a copy of the Veterans Advisory Board letter. They don't want the monument at the cemetery. And I'm hoping someone here will read it, the whole letter tonight, to express that. They have given recommendation to put the monument back on the plaza. That's their recommendation. Anyway, I'd like to see it restored. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the Veterans Advisory Board did indicate that, because they stated this in their letter, because it is something that is offensive, that people are not all agreeing on the monument, that they don't want to have anything to do with that, to have it relocated to the National Cemetery. Yes.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Barbara Fix. I live at 610 Alicia Street here in Santa Fe. There's just a lot of hurt surrounding this whole issue. There's a lot of ignorance, a lot of assumptions. Some could say there's sort of people adopting the causes of others that aren't their own. I think was part of the whole destruction of the obelisk. I happened to go downtown that day and saw it happen, and what I saw was an exuberance of youth that needs to be channeled into something more useful. What's so clear is that, I mean, it's a conundrum for us all. How do you solve it? Well, you go back to what it was before, and I want to encourage you to strongly urge to restore the monument. And like Frank Katz was talking about, restoring, somehow dealing with the hurt that comes from the use of the word savage Indian. My understanding is that, well, we hear from a historian that they were referring to the non-Pueblo Indians and who were invaded. It's, you know, their hurt happens upon hurt. I saw a monument I was traveling, saw in Memphis, Texas, and it showed a two statues, one of a doughboy from World War II and one might have been a Confederate. And they had lists of names of soldiers who had died. And under it said, this is for all soldiers who fought in wars. And we know that war is not what we want. We want peace. We have to create peace in our neighborhood, in our communities. One way, the plaques don't tell everything. I've wondered, and all sorts of ideas have come up. We'll make a pyramid on top of it, do everything, get rid of it so that we can dance in the full plaza. Just many different, it shows some of the creativity of our community. But I would hope that there might be some way with modern technology, with QR codes or something, that the monument is restored, but there is some way that people can voice their opinions, to let it out. For the people who thought it should be destroyed, let them be able to speak too. A way that people can go around with their iPhones or whatever and see, well, what is the issue? Because the simple words on a plaque only hint at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. My name's Elizabeth West, and you won't be surprised, many of you, that I also agree that the reconstruction in some way of the monument, including the obelisk, the soldiers' monument, with also paying attention to the three, what are they, panels, plaques, plinths, they all begin with P, so I guess you can choose your word. That needs to be addressed. But the main thing you're going to be talking about tonight, I believe, is this particular resolution. But that word particular, I find extremely confusing. I've been following this, and I was unable to go last night to the Finance Committee and just attend and listen to what was going on because I was providing a birthday party for my ex-husband. That's important. However, I've been to every other event, many of them related to this, and I'm finding it fascinating. First of all, what was then the current resolution has been read by one of the people putting it forward, Councilor Romero Worth. And just in case people haven't read it, and I think that's worthy. I'm a retired school teacher. I taught at mid-high. That's a good thing, to repeat things. But the particular word has me a little disturbed because what resolution are you going to be discussing? Is it the one with amendments? Now, I haven't seen it. So maybe with amendments, it's something that I would think is just simply terrific. But I haven't seen it. I'm going on what I read about in the very beginning. And I've heard I've heard fuzzy things. That might be my fault, but I've really tried to pay attention. That's one thing. The last thing I want to say, in defense of Councilor Romero Worth in particular, because I have spoken to her a little bit about this and my concerns, and I took the liberty of telling her, and I don't think she'll mind if I say this again in public, that I felt that the city council, the mayor, kind of let her and the other folks who did the previous resolution about reconstructing the monument, when it was greeted by a horrible uproar. I was here, and it was just terrible. It should have been, no matter what side the people who were yelling and threatening and scary acting were on, the mayor and anybody in charge should have said, okay, that's enough. You all go out, we're going to discuss this. And so in fairness to her, because I think that was very scary, other things have been scary, and it's understandable. What I'm afraid of, if we don't reconstruct this and do the best we can to figure out how to step forward legally, responsibly, and fairly is going to be difficult, we know that, but legally and responsibly, we will be going along with vandals. We will be saying, we're so afraid, we don't dare tell people who are being rude, you need to leave. When I was at the library, we asked people to leave. You can come back once you're behaving better. So that's what should have happened that night. And that's what I say sincerely in favor of supporting Carol Romero Worth in particular, the Counselor Romero Worth, pardon me, in making an effort. But now this next resolution, at least the one I know about, you might have something in your packets. You may have gotten something today that you could look at. I don't have that. So thank you for listening, but I find it frustrating not to be able to comment on what you are going to be discussing. However, you hear me? Thank you very much. I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Good evening. My name is Beverly Spears. I'm an architect. I've practiced architecture in Santa Fe for 50 years. And one of my designs is the bandstand, the gazebo on the plaza. So I've looked very carefully at the plaza. The resolution as presented was to study the feasibility of moving the Soldiers Monument off the plaza, and if it was at all feasible, to go ahead and start the process of moving it. But let me say that there are 4 national historic landmarks in Santa Fe. There's Southwest Regional Center for the Park Service, Barrio de Nalco, the Palace of the Governors, and the Plaza. The Soldiers Monument is the oldest and most prominent feature of the plaza. If that were to be dug up and moved off the plaza, I think it can be done, but it would not only be very expensive, but it will drastically harm the plaza. So I urge you as a board focused on historic preservation in this city to take action to advise the city council that the Soldiers Monument should be restored in place and replace the offending plaque with something more appropriate. I think it's amazing the consensus that we have at all these public hearings and meetings that we've had over the past 2 weeks. That's been about the only opinion that's been presented by the public. And I have here, basically, it's a statement, it's a petition about restoring the Soldiers Monument on the plaza. And it's signed by 108 Santa Feans who want to see the monument restored with the 4th plaque replaced. There's a lot of consensus around this, so I hope you all will take action tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beverly.
I'm Ann Albrink. I've lived in Santa Fe or the area for 52 years.
Can you bring that mic down to your mouth?
My name is Ann Albrink. I've lived in the Santa Fe area for 52 years. I live now at 157 Calle Ojo Feliz, but I used to live in the historic district for 33 years. In looking at this, I looked at my Virginia background with Robert E. Lee statues, and I looked at some other information, and I just wanted to share a little bit of it with you. The Oñate statue, which was originally placed north of Espanola, was erected in 1994. That statue was removed, or excuse me, in 1997, somebody cut the foot off Oñate because he had cut the foot off so many Acoma Indians. And the statue was moved to Espanola in, I think, 2020, and it has now been removed. The Washington Monument is an obelisk, and it is not as old as Santa Fe's obelisk. It was completed in 1884, and our obelisk was completed in 1868. I don't think we have to erase history to accommodate history. I do think that the obelisk is part of what we must look at as our history, and I agree with doing something about the north side, but that's a very minimal change.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Chatterjee. Good to be with you, Madam Chairman, members of the board. I'm about a 25-year resident of Santa Fe, which makes me new by local standards, but I've been following this issue in the media, which is the place where most people get informed. And I think it's very important to take that into account. I stand for an orderly solution for the Soldiers' Monument that stood on the plaza for over 150 years before its destruction in 2020. During that time, all visitors to the plaza could see the obelisk and had no reason to think that it was not part or an integral part of this place. And I think that's important because sometimes we get kind of led astray by things like, was the monument specifically named in an official document or not? Maybe that doesn't really matter because it's really part of the place. Since that time, the city government has tried various approaches to remediate this destructive event. And the city has not provided a clear written analysis of what governmental and quasi-governmental organizations have jurisdiction over various aspects of that site. And we need to have that kind of material. We have needed it since day one. And if we had had that kind of analysis, I believe that we would have a better understanding of what we can and cannot do on that site and the issues that come before your board and the other committees as well as the city council are impacted by that. And various parties, such as the Soldiers Monument Study Group, have assembled and tried to produce some of that, prepare some of that information. However, in my view, most critical is the city and its governing body need to explain what can and cannot be done so that the entire community understands the limitations for solving the obelisk situation. We need accurate information, not another proposed option as to where to move the monument, such as the National Cemetery. At a minimum, if the study goes forward, time must be given to digest what its findings are, as I believe are suggested in a proposed amendment by Councilor Michael Garcia, and he may have others, I understand, but certainly we need time to digest. Always had that problem with this. To me, because of the 150 years that it's been there, the plaza is the logical site for the Soldiers' Monument, albeit with updated information plaques or similar modifications. We also need the information that is required to make repairs, the associated costs, and the timeline associated to accomplish them. Without that kind of information, the public discussion will still be this whirling kettle that it has always been, regardless of differences of opinion. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this
Thank you.
information has helped.
Chair, Board, thank you for having this public comment. I've been looking forward to public comment in the city for a long time, especially on this subject. So I really appreciate you giving us the time to do public comment. My comments basically is, I don't see a plan B on this resolution. You know, you're going to spend $200,000 to look at moving the monument, but if that agreed upon to move it, what are we going to replace it with? Another 4 years, another 5 years of waiting for something to happen? You know, there should always have been something in place right away as to what would happen if this was going to move. What kind of monument would we be? What will we do? We scrap the whole thing? You know, there's never any talk of what's going to happen after the fact. You know, this resolution was rushed through. I think that we should have put a little bit more time into figuring out what Plan B is. At least have another plan. So if this is accepted, what's the city going to do with the monument gone? You know, it's very hard to me. It's just frustrating that we have this thing going when the monument, it should always still stay there no matter what. You know, if the plaques are wrong, you can always put north, west, south, and east on the east side of it, which a lot of those monuments, those obelisks they offer direction to which way it is. And this resolution doesn't offer any direction of what's next. So I want to thank you for your time and letting me speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Madam Chair, board members, my name is Virgil Vigil, and I'm here because this is this subject has touched everybody in the city. Everybody's been touched by this subject. I agree with what everybody has said before me, and I support everything that they've said. But let's take a look back as to why we're here. We're here because 4 years ago, in that beautiful gazebo that was built there in front of the monument, the mayor promised a group of people that he will remove 3 things from the city. They've all been accomplished, by the way. The first thing that he said, he was going to remove the statue of Don Diego de Vargas. He did that. Second thing he said, he was going to remove the Soldiers' Monument, what he calls the obelisk. Actually, a Soldiers' Monument, that's what they dedicated for. And then he said he was going to remove the Kit Carson obelisk right back here. All those things were accomplished. Now, why were they accomplished? He promised this and radical 2 groups. One was called the Red Nation. They're not even from here. They're from the Dakotas. And then the other one is the 3 Sisters. They're not even members of the Pueblos. There's one lady, Sina Crasto, that says that she belongs to the Taos Pueblo. They don't recognize her. She doesn't have the Pueblos have numbers on each, like we have Social Security numbers. They issue numbers for their people there. She doesn't have that. She is not a member of the Pueblo. But yet, this lady convinced the mayor that those 3 things were offensive to them. To them, those 2 groups. Not the Pueblos. The Pueblos have not said anything. I have not read anything. The mayor said that they've talked to him. Oh yeah? That's just hearsay. We haven't seen anything that says that the Pueblos have asked him that. That's all hearsay from the mayor. That's why they came down, because the mayor made a promise to this group that he would tear him down. He kept his promise. Now, he caused all this division. We've been going through this for 4 years now. 4 years. Now you're going to be asked to make a premature decision on a resolution that the council is going to present to you shortly. What is the resolution? It has too many questions in there. It's not a fully completed resolution. They're making too many changes. Every time there's a meeting, there's a new change. So they're going to ask you to vote on this resolution that we don't know what it says. Maybe we'll know tomorrow when the city council meets. We might know tomorrow. Now, they've been taking this resolution to various committees, various boards, and asking for their approval. One of the things that this resolution states is that they want to move the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery. Well, you know, I've been in the military for 30 years. I know what it's like. The National Cemetery is to honor soldiers and their family members that gave their lives, that are veterans. That's what it's for. This monument, Soldiers Monument, there's no bodies there. There's nothing there. The soldiers that fought in the Civil War, they're buried over there. This monument, which was passed in 1867 by the New Mexico Territory, we weren't a state at the time, they passed this resolution and they paid $15,000, a lot of money back then, to build this monument. It's been there since then, to honor those soldiers. That's what the purpose of the monument was. A year later, they provided a little bit of funding to put 4 plaques. Okay, there's 4 plaques there. One of those plaques, and we all know which one it is in today's standards, is offensive. Not back in 1867, but in today's standards, yes, it is. Everybody supports removing that plaque. There is no doubt. We like to see that moved. Now, the veterans, the city's own Veterans Advisory Board, they took this to them and they said, no, we're not going to support you because it creates a lot of controversy. And you have to go to the administrator over here at the National Cemetery has no authority. It has to come up from Washington, D.C. And if you've been in the government, federal government, you know that it is difficult to get anything done. Very difficult, and to get things passed. It's not going to happen. Read what the Veterans Advisory Board said in their letter. I won't have to repeat it. Now, again, the Pueblos don't support moving it. They don't. This monument was to honor soldiers. It's been there for 150 some years. It should continue to be there. The only reason that this resolution is being presented is because the mayor and his few followers there, he does not want to lose face. And he really didn't, because he already removed them. So he should not be objecting to it. They will tell you that they need this bill approved, this resolution approved. In order for the city manager to write a letter to the Department of Veterans in Washington, D.C., asking permission to put that Soldiers Monument over there. Since when does the city manager need a city council approval to submit a letter? That shouldn't be required. If it was, maybe the mayor should write that letter and ask for that permission. But they will tell you that it's required approval to do that. They will also tell you that this is a safety issue. They'll tell you that shortly. And then they'll bring up 2 examples. Example number 1, they'll say that when they removed the statue of Oñate in Albuquerque, that there was a shooting. That's true. There was. But let's look what happened there. The mayor, the management, the people in charge knew that there was going to be a protest. And what did the mayor do? He said to the police officers, I don't want you by anywhere near here. So they weren't. They were around the area. And then there was an incident that occurred. Yes, It's true, it happened. But why did it happen? Because there was no police presence there. That's why it happened. There was no deterrence there. That's why it happened. And then they'll tell you that they were trying to prevent an incident that happened in Española, where another person got injured. What happened is they were going to put the statue of Oñate, and they already had the pedestal there. 2 days before they put the statue there, these radical two groups, the Red Nations and the Three Sisters, took control of the pedestal. They took control of that pedestal and they stayed there for 2 days. And again, once again, there was no police presence during that time. The police only showed up when there was problems, but they knew that they were there. So when they tell you it's a safety issue, all you have to do is provide protection, which both mayor in Albuquerque failed to do, and this mayor here failed to do that too. Because when this mayor knew that he knew what was happening. He got advance word, and he did nothing. He let it happen. I went over there when they were on top of the obelisk, and I asked the guy, "What are you doing there?" And he told me, "Well, the mayor promised us that he was going to remove this obelisk, and he hasn't done it, so we're going to do it." Okay. And I told them, "You know what? You're destroying the obelisk." They didn't care. There were 7 police officers on the gazebo, right there. I went to them and says, "Officers, look what they're doing." He said, "Well, the mayor told us to stand by, not to do anything, unless somebody was going to get hurt." Okay. That was on Columbus Day, Indigenous Day to some. It's coming up pretty soon again. So here, once again, we have incidents that the administration knows that something's going on, but they do not provide any protection. So I am here also as the president of the Unión Protectiva. The Unión Protectiva was established in 1915, right after we became a state, 1912, right? 1915. Because, and it was basically all Spanish people at the time there, they came up with this organization for 3 things, 3 main pillars. One is to help the members of the organization in any way they could. Another one is to educate the members on our Spanish heritage. And the third one was protection. To protect our history, culture, and our traditions and faith also. Okay. So we've been around for quite some time. The membership, I'm the president, the membership saw what was going on, and they passed a resolution, which I have to abide by. And they said, "We want you to sue this mayor and sue the city because what they are doing is wrong." So we did. This is 4 years ago. 2 weeks ago, we went to court, right up here, district court. It was a 2-day court. The judge will be making a decision here in about approximately 15 days from now. Okay. What are we asking the Unión Protectiva? Our remedy is this. We want this obelisk, the Soldiers' Monument, restored as it was originally. And take off that one plaque. We don't like that plaque either. Okay? Take off that one plaque. That's all we're asking in this court. That's all we're asking. You will find it, you will get a decision here within 12 weeks. Now, I'll end by saying, don't fall into this trap that they're going to be presenting to you here shortly. Don't fall for it. Table this thing, wait 12 days. what the judge says. It's a hurry. They'll tell you they have to do this right away. They're not. The court will do it here shortly. So that's all I have to say. And thank you very much. I hope you table this or not support it, either one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beal.
Evening, Madam Chair. My name is David Rash. I was a historic preservation planner for the city of Santa Fe for 15 years, and I managed or administered the Historic Preservation Division for 12 years. So I'm coming to you with that expertise in mind. I have a lot of problems with this resolution. I would appreciate being given the opportunity to tell you about the problems I have with this resolution, because there are, I don't know, 14 whereases, and I have many problems. Some as simple as they didn't even get the Bradford Prince's name right or his title right, which is territorial governor, not New Mexico governor. Or that there's only one option for the monument, which is to move it to the National Cemetery. You've heard tonight a majority of people have another viable option: restore it on site, remove the north plaque. I can think of two more viable options. Move it somewhere else. Restore it on the plaza with all 4 plaques missing. I love that idea to do north, south, east, and west, because all of us know what that monument represents, both positive and negative. We don't need the panels to tell us. As a matter of fact, you can't just remove a 50-year-old bronze panel or the plaque that's been there since 1869. The national park standards require using the Uni Guide. The city's done it at Fort Marcy with the archaeological display. I did it also with the Santa Fe Trail at the Museum of Spanish Colonial Art. You can't just put up a sign on a National Historic Landmark if you want to. You can't. Only the national park decides the materials, the design of it, and they have to approve the language. There's no way they're going to approve language on Santa Fe Plaza that even talks about the Kit Carson Monument. It's not even eligible to be on a panel on the plaza. That's what it says right now on the plaza. I have so many problems with the action of the city and this resolution. But because of my expertise in historic districts law, I'm going to focus on the 11th whereas. It starts on page 5, line 5, and this is where it says very clearly, you do not have jurisdiction. And that's the one thing I like about this resolution. It says, let's study it. We need to know the law. The law is very clearly, and unfortunately I sent this by the deadline, but you didn't get it, 2 pages. If you look at 14-2.6b, it's very clear. This is the law. The governing body and the planning commission gives you the authority for the city's process in historic preservation anywhere in the city. Historic districts, landmarks outside of the city. And I'm not going to read it, but it's right there for you in the first paragraph of my 2-page submittal. I also give you what the governing body's powers are. You can see that they are not what it lists as 14-2.6c. Your powers and duties, there are 10, the bottom of page 1. Clearly, number 7, you compile and maintain a list of historical sites and structures. That is your authority. That is the municipal register. And because the municipal register is what I was an expert in, and you are as well, that's why I'm focusing on this 11th whereas that says you do not have authority because the obelisk is an object. So now look at page 2. The definition in 14-12 isn't even in the resolution. There's a conveniently left out part of that definition, which I provide for you here. The entire definition is critical. An object is to distinguish from structures those constructions that are primarily artistic in nature. There's 3 clauses. Primarily artistic in nature. We all know the obelisk is primarily a cenotaph for fallen soldiers. It's a neoclassical architectural style. This is not an artistic object. Number 2, are relatively small in scale, the monument was over 30 feet high. You know as well as I do, that is much taller than many listed historic buildings in Santa Fe. It was huge. It is not relatively small in scale. And thirdly, simply constructed. The monument is made of sandstone, marble, brick. It is not simply constructed. It actually follows the definition of structure, constructed of multiple elements in a fixed location of the ground. But you know what? Even if we must agree that the obelisk is an object, you still have jurisdiction. In the Historic Compounds Ordinance 14-5.2 K2, it clearly says that you can designate objects on historical sites. You've even already given designation to a historical site, Fairview Cemetery. You already designated as a historical site. So I've got a lot of problems with this resolution, but I wanted to point exactly to that one where you have jurisdiction. You, then the HPD at state, then the National Park Service. No one else has jurisdiction in this town or in this country. You have to get approval from the Advisory Council of the National Park Service, period. So I beg that you do not approve this resolution, but really look at what we have to do. And you can't even decide on this resolution because you haven't determined if the plaza is a significant or contributing historical site. You have not determined if the Soldiers Monument is a significant or contributing structure or object. You have to do that first before you can even say if moving it is allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Historic Design Review Board. My name is Manuel Garcia. I'm a 14th generation Santa Fean. I'm a lifelong resident of the Historic District. I have come before this board before with my own properties. I hold this board with the utmost respect and integrity. I come before you tonight to ask a few simple questions that you can answer during your discussion regarding the resolution pertaining to the Soldiers Monument. I understand that in a previous HDRB meeting that there was a brief discussion on the topic of Soldiers Monument. It was stated during that discussion that the City Attorney's Office provided guidance to the board about the monument. Would this board be willing to disclose what guidance was given to this board? What guidance has been provided to the Historic Design Review Board on this topic by the administration and/or the City Attorney's Office? Why, number two, why is the HDBR not leading the discussion on this topic? Why is the HDBR not taking action on this item, only holding a discussion? I believe that our plaza is the most significant historic part of our city, in which the monument was erected in 1868. As you all know, that surpasses the HDBR 50-year rule. I encourage all of you to read the op-ed article by Dr. Tom Chavis in this past Sunday's paper. As you can see, we Santa Feans want to see the monument erected as it was. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're back, Stephanie?
I am. I'm asking indulgence because I thought you had a 2-minute limit, so I really rushed and everybody else seemingly went way over. So I'm not going to repeat too much. I did present to you through public comment what I believe as a historian who's worked here in actual primary documents for over 45 years and who is a resident for 49. I have tried to provide you some facts as opposed to misperceptions. And there are other, justifications. But what really offends me as a historian is the wanting to put it back, but leaving that one plaque out. That is part of the history. It is messy. It is offensive. And I think the word should be savage, should be left out. But I would much rather see context put there because taking it away makes it just fake history. You've just erased something that occurred that people thought this was the territorial legislators dictating what went on those plaques. So this was the consensus, the value at the time. I think it's important to talk about how values change over time. So I really don't want to see that part wiped out if it's going to stay there. And I find it, again, just hard to accept that people just want to wipe away history and pretend that somehow now that we see it differently, we should pretend it never happened. I think that's a really big mistake. I also gave you a link to Esteban Rael Galvez's article on the obelisk that he wrote in 2020, which again talks about this and talks about, how, for example, this was the people, New Mexicans held indigenous people as slaves. So it wasn't really necessarily anti-slavery, it was anti-Texan. Texans had invaded about 20 years before that, claiming to the Rio Grande. There's just things like that that are different. If you look at it, you look at the written record, you see something perhaps a little bit different. The same thing with the idea that savage Indians came from the idea that you're talking about what the Spaniards called Indios Barbaros, which really meant nomadic Indians as opposed to Pueblo Indians. But that's not what it said, and it's 1868. So again, I can see that it would be offensive to every Native American person, not just whoever was there. And to say that you're not going to honor Buffalo soldiers who participated in Indian wars, again, it destroys history. So I think we need to look at that. I think we all do need to see what the resolution looks like now, at what amendments are being accepted. Maybe you should table it. Maybe you should look at David Rash's suggestions about actually giving these, the plaza and the obelisk status. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Chair, I don't want to speak again, but I did submit this petition electronically before the deadline, and it did not appear in your packet. So I'd like to be able just to give you a copy if that's.
I think it was given to us. Yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, board members, thank you. I very much appreciate your patience here and your indulgence. More your patience than your indulgence. We all knew we'd be here. We probably all kind of wish we weren't going to end up here, but here we are now. Now I'm going to try to keep it very short. I really appreciate my well-spoken peers that show up at these meetings. You've heard a lot of expertise tonight. I want to first make the point that I think a lot of us are flying blind, but we do know how we feel. I think that a lawsuit that is taking place right now and has yet to be resolved is something that should hold you up in agreeing to this resolution. I think it's inappropriate to move forward knowing that there is a lawsuit pending. I'm here as a native Santa Fean, and this monument is a structure that's important to me as a native Santa Fean. It means many things to me. It means many things to many people. And I think that this resolution is should not be passed. And with all respect to Councillor Worth and her associates, I would like to turn this on its head. I would very strongly approve a resolution whose aim was to study the feasibility of reconstructing the monument in place. This can be done in creative ways which continue to reflect the recent history. But I very strongly feel that our city should not be cowed by illegal and terroristic threatening, which I have witnessed in this chamber many times. Now, I don't want to be on the firing line for that any more than you do. But we as Santa Feans need to rebuild this structure. And then let's leave the plaques out of it, but let us determine as the current living citizens of this town what that structure means to us currently. It's going to mean a lot of different things to us. The people that have come and gone in the past are not here. We are. We need to deal with this on our terms and in our way as Santa Feans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Anyone else in this room wishing to comment on on what is here before us? Resolution. It appears not. Is there anyone on Zoom?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here this evening and speaking on this very important matter. Apologies to all of you. Is that better? So sorry, I'll repeat. I just want to thank all of you for being here this evening, taking time from your schedules. I love Santa Fecinos because they are involved in their community. They want the right things for their community, whether you are a native of this community or you just got here yesterday and you become involved in the community. And that is very important to come here before this body and other city bodies to state your opinion. For me, it is of utmost importance to hear those opinions. And I hope to goodness that we come to some conclusion in reference to this matter that has been going on for 4 years. And I hope we come to a solution. We will not please everyone, as we know, but I hope that we come to a solution that most people in the community will be happy with, because this has been going on already for too long, and nobody wants to see the obelisk in the present state that it is right now. And we do need to come to a solution, and that's what I think that within this evening's comments, that we are moving towards that. And I would like to hear from Councilor Romero Worth at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members. Thank you, everyone who came out tonight. I appreciate what you've had to say, and we've been on a journey together through the city's advisory committees and standing committees of the council. And I have, as was noted earlier, been starting by reading the resolution. I initially did that because I think it answers some of the questions that keep coming up over and over again. I think it also sort of lays out the argument for why this is here. And it just gives us a starting point, a foundation. So if you'll indulge me, I will also speak to at least the amendments that I am presenting. Some of them are in the packets tonight. There are a couple that will be in the packets tomorrow night, but I'm happy to walk through those. There are, I believe, other amendments coming from other counselors. I do not have those, and those are not in the packets at this point. So I can't speak to them because I'm not bringing those. All right, so as this resolution was introduced, it is sponsored by myself, Councilor Alma Castro, Councilor Amanda Chavez. It's a resolution directing the city manager to investigate the feasibility of relocating the Soldiers Monument to the Santa Fe National Cemetery and, if feasible, to take appropriate steps to relocate the monument, recognizing the distinct purposes of the plaza and the monument. Whereas the governing body of the city of Santa Fe recognizes the community's need to move forward after the emotional events of October 2020, when the obelisk located in the Santa Fe Plaza, also known as the Soldiers Monument or obelisk, was damaged and partially torn down. And whereas the city sought public feedback and a recommendation regarding the Soldiers Monument during the Culture, History, Art, Reconciliation, and Truth process, sometimes referred to as CHART, whereas CHART's final report, published in August of 2022, stated that data collected over 11 months of public engagement, including dialogues, meetings, conversations, interviews, phone calls, and email communications, and the results of 2 surveys indicate that the Santa Fe community is still divided about what to do about the Soldiers Monument. And whereas ongoing public division about the Soldiers Monument was evidenced in the spring of 2023, when 4 city councilors introduced a resolution proposing to reassemble it, preserving the cracks as part of history and incorporating new, more inclusive language about it around its base. And whereas after receiving hours of largely unsupportive public testimony about the proposed resolution, including polarized perspectives, some members of the public describing pain felt regarding the existence of the Soldiers Monument, and other members of the public describing pain felt as a result of damage to the Soldiers Monument, the councilors decided to withdraw the resolution from further consideration by the governing body. And whereas the plaza is listed on the national and state registries of historic properties, because in 1975, the city nominated the city park for that recognition with the federal government. And whereas the city's nomination was very clear that the property it was nominating was the plaza rather than any particular object then existing in the plaza. The city's nomination identifies 1609 as the year of the founding of the city of Santa Fe, when the plaza began as a quote-unquote feature of the city, and 1846 is the year that from the plaza, General Kearny proclaimed the annexation of New Mexico into the United States. And the city's nomination describes the condition of the plaza as quote-unquote altered, having decreased from 2 city blocks to 1, and now including landscaping, flagstone, walks, benches, and cottonwood trees. By contrast, in quote-unquote Spanish times, the plaza was once twice as large and quote-unquote an open expanse of packed dirt. And the city's nomination states that after 1846, quote, upon the arrival of the Anglo-Americans, the plaza was fenced in and planted with alfalfa, then reduced to its present size, and finally enclosed by buildings on 3 sides confronting the palace, end quote. And the city's nomination describes the plaza as a quote-unquote site rather than a quote-unquote structure or quote-unquote object, the quote-unquote present use as a quote-unquote park rather than a quote-unquote museum, quote-unquote government, or quote-unquote military, among other options. Described access as quote-unquote unrestricted rather than quote-unquote restricted, and described the significance as quote-unquote transportation, with the explanation that beginning in 1821, the trade route to Santa Fe from the United States was opened, and the quote, the plaza provided the final goal for caravans on their 8 to 10 week journeys, end quote, for traders and travelers on the Santa Fe Trail. And the city's nomination describes the Soldiers Monument as present in the plaza, a Soldiers Monument erected after the Civil War, but did not identify the Soldiers Monument as the basis for the plaza's significance, nor did it identify the significance of the plaza under any following available options, such as quote-unquote sculpture, quote-unquote military, quote-unquote politics/government, quote-unquote art, quote-unquote exploration/settlement, or quote-unquote landscape architecture. And whereas the Soldiers Monument's purpose is distinct from the plaza's, the Soldiers Monument was funded by the territorial legislature of New Mexico in the 1860s and erected on federal land to recognize local veterans. 3 sides of the base of the Soldiers Monument commemorate soldiers who fought in the United States Civil War in battles with Confederate forces, including the Battle of Glorieta Pass that allowed the Union to retain control of the American Southwest. And the 4th side originally stated, quote, "To the heroes who have fallen in the various battles with savage Indians in the territory of New Mexico," unquote, also sometimes referred to as the 4th plaque. And whereas the Soldiers Monument, its plaques, and its location on the plaza have been controversial for at least the last 115 years. In 1909, New Mexico Governor Bransford Prince publicly opposed a proposal to cut out the word, quote unquote, rebel in 3 places on the plaques and replace it with, quote unquote, Confederate. In July of 1973, the City Council voted to remove the entire Soldiers Monument after receiving a letter from then Governor Bruce King that requested removal of the 4th plaque, stating that, quote unquote, word, quote, savage was offensive to Indians and non-Indians, end quote. In September of 1973, the city manager reported that David King, the city planning officer at the time, requested the council rescind its action regarding the Soldiers Monument, and the council voted to rescind. In 1974, someone chiseled out the word, quote unquote, savage from the 4th plaque, and shortly thereafter, the All-Indian Pueblo Council, quote, strongly urged that, end quote, the word savage not appear on the Soldiers Monument again. In 2000, the NAACP Santa Fe branch submitted a guest editorial responding to the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, defending the NAACP's proposal to remove the Soldiers Monument from its location in the plaza, noting that, quote, we have a beautiful veteran cemetery where we have many ceremonies every year to honor those killed as a potential ideal setting for the monument, end quote. Also in 2000, the Historic Society of New Mexico wrote to the city of Santa Fe's mayor, council, manager, and quote unquote people of Santa Fe that, quote, the words savage Indians excluded the Pueblo Indians who had always been regarded by the Spanish, the Mexicans, and then the Anglos as quote unquote civilized Indians. And in that removal or destruction of the monument would be akin to quote unquote book burning, end quote. Whereas the plaza previously featured other structures in its center, a 1992 archaeological report regarding the plaza describes at least 3 prior structures: a rock sundial in the late 1820s, a pyramid that replaced the sundial, 50 feet in height, erected as a quote-unquote memento of the Mexican independence, which came down in 1845, and a bull ring that briefly replaced the pyramid. And whereas the city's historic district code does not apply to the Soldiers Monument and associated structures because they are quote-unquote objects excluded from the code's requirements. Quote-unquote objects include, quote, sculpture, monuments, boundary markers, statuary, and fountains. See the Santa Fe Code 1987, 14-12.1. And whereas the New Mexico Prehistoric and Historic Sites Preservation Act, NMSA 1978, Section 18-8-1 to 8, applies to a city program or project if the project would, 1, be an adverse effect on the plaza, and 2, has a prudent or reasonable alternative. See sections 18-87 and 18-83, subsection C. And whereas the city of Albuquerque and Rio Arriba County have recently suffered violence in relation to the placement of controversial monument spaces. For example, on September 28th, 2023, a shooter violently attacked community members celebrating Rio Arriba County officials' decision to postpone the county's plans to relocate a statue of Conquistador Juan de Oñate to just outside the county annex building. And on June 2020, there was a shooting in Albuquerque during a protest of a statue of the Conquistador Juan de Oñate. And whereas continuing the status quo of a plywood box surrounding the Soldiers Monument space or reconstructing the Soldiers Monument in the plaza distract from its use as a community gathering space, and reconstruction would be a safety threat to the public. And whereas the Santa Fe National Cemetery, located approximately 1 mile northwest from the plaza, is a national shrine to veterans. It flies the U.S. flag over well-kept grounds and headstones and monuments that commemorate the lives and service of veterans. And whereas at the close of the Civil War, the federal government established what became the National Cemetery for the reinterment of Union soldiers who died during the Civil War there. Whereas initial internments at the National Cemetery were the remains of 265 U.S. soldiers from the battlefields of Glorieta, Klauskis, and Fort Marcy. Whereas the National Cemetery also includes monuments and memorials dedicated to groups of veterans, including several memorials honoring veterans who served during the 1800s, a memorial to World War II glider pilots, a memorial to women who served in the Navy, and China-Burma Indian Veterans Memorial dedicated to the memory of men and women who fought in World War II. And whereas the National Cemetery's dedicated purposes and the Soldiers Monument's purposes are aligned, and whereas determining the next steps for the Soldiers Monument requires the governing body to propose a plan. And whereas relocating the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery would not adversely affect the cemetery, and whereas there is not a prudent or feasible alternative to relocating the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery, the relocation would protect both the plaza and the Soldiers Monument and would sustain, if not enhance, the historic basis for the city's nomination, including the importance of the plaza's location at the end of the Santa Fe Trail and the plaza's use as a central and historic town plaza and park that is accessible to all, used as a community gathering place for social and economic purposes. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the governing body of the City of Santa Fe that the city is committed to the plaza's continued use as a city park and central plaza accessible to all, and to continuing the plaza's historic, social, and economic purposes, featuring community gathering celebrations. Be it further resolved that the city manager shall investigate whether it's feasible to move the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery, preferably close to where the Civil War soldiers that the monument commemorates were laid to rest. Be it further resolved that if relocation is feasible, the city manager shall proceed with proposing budget and contracts to expend funds to remove the fourth plaque and relocate the Soldiers Monument, including steps to preserve, protect, and minimize harm to the plaza. I'll note that this last, be it further resolved, that directs the city manager to proceed with proposing budget and contracts to expend funds to remove the plaque and relocate the monument, was taken out of the resolution at the Quality of Life Committee. I do have an amendment to put in, to be very clear that this proposal is to move to understand whether it's feasible to move the Soldiers Monument to the cemetery without the fourth plaque. So that, I do have an amendment to put that back in. I also have an amendment, I have two different amendments actually. One to put this language back in, but one to put it back in another context, and we can go over that in a minute. I just want to give you a little bit of understanding about how I was part of the original resolution that was proposed in the spring of 2023 with the idea that we would restore the monument with showing the cracks so that you could see that it had been broken, that we put different plaques around it, and that resolution was withdrawn because it lacked community support. This resolution that I just read to you tonight was brought to me by constituents in May of 2023, and at the time I told them I didn't think I could bring it forward because I thought the community was too polarized. What changed for me, though, was in the fall of last year when the Rio Arriba County officials tried to put the statue of Oñate back near a county building. And what happened led to gun violence. And to me, it became clear that putting this monument back in our plaza is a public safety threat, is a potential public safety threat. And so I don't think it can go back in the plaza. So that led me to think that maybe this proposal to see if we can move it to the National Cemetery might be a viable solution. I think nobody is happy with the status quo. Nobody wants to see that box go on in the center of the plaza indefinitely. And so I feel like we have to do something. I would note that the city manager and other city staff can't do anything to propose a plan for this monument until the governing body provides direction. And that's what this proposal is trying to do. The word feasible, is it feasible? I use deliberately to be the biggest umbrella to capture all the things that I think need to happen in order to see whether this is a viable proposal. One, we have to make a formal ask of the National Cemetery. My constituents did reach out to the cemetery officials, to the director here, and he expressed interest in considering this idea, but he noted that he could not do anything until there was a formal ask. The city manager cannot make that formal ask until the governing body directs it. We have since learned that the National Cemetery here doesn't make that decision. Once a formal ask is made by the city, there is a federal process that would be started to decide whether the monument could be placed in the National Cemetery. It's been noted several times. There's a letter from the Veterans Advisory Board. This resolution was considered by them, and one of the things that they have helped us learn is that there are guidelines for determining whether the monument could be placed there. They express and they use, they say they're highly skeptical that the VA's Office to Memorial Affairs would look favorably on the request from the city. I would note that while they are skeptical, we won't know until we ask. And my hope is that if we take this monument without the fourth plaque and we set it in context at the National Cemetery, that will diminish or get rid of what has been controversial about this monument. I think place is very important. So they go on to, and you can read this, and just to be, because it was brought up, they recommend, like many did here, retain the monument on the plaza, restore it, put cameras up, put a neutrally worded plaque. So they too believe that it would be a good idea to put it back in the plaza. I think this resolution has also been to the Arts Commission. And the Arts Commission, while they did not vote, we should have the draft minutes from that commission. I did attend that meeting. They did not vote, but there was a general consensus that this proposal was something that was worth considering. It was something worth pursuing to see whether this is a viable idea. I think so far, the advisory boards have reflected the polarization in the community. We have the Veterans Board that says, we're skeptical that it could go there, and we'd like to see it put back up. We have the Arts Commission saying, I think this is something worth pursuing. So back to the feasibility, we'd have to make a formal ask of the National Cemetery. The other thing that we don't know a whole lot about is what is required to put the Soldiers Monument back together. We would need to hire structural engineers, and that, if this resolution passes, would provide direction to staff to do that, to issue the contracts that are necessary to hire the experts who could tell us, how do you put it back together? Can you just take the pieces? Do they all stack up on each other neatly? Can you add a little adhesive of some type and it's back? Or have there been portions of it that are so badly damaged or non-existent that we might have to recast parts of it? I don't know what percentage of the monument might have to be recast using new material. I don't know how that would look. This resolution would help us get some answers. It would also help us understand what is involved if we wanted to move it. If the National Cemetery goes through their process and says that this is something they will take, we then need to know what's involved in moving it. It's been noted that that may be an expensive process. I think that's something, once we know that, we'll have to decide, is that something we want to spend the money on? We may have other people who would help us with that if they believed that this was a path forward for us. We won't know any of that, though, until we can hire the people necessary to tell us what's involved. So the feasibility language in the resolution is broad because there are a number of things, and there may be other things that we haven't even thought of that would be necessary in determining feasibility. Let's see, what else haven't I touched on? My amendment that I did present in front of the Finance Committee last night does three things. We heard at the Arts Commission when the resolution was there that it would be nice if we acknowledged that there was history, there was community and culture prior to the obelisk, the Soldiers Monument being placed in the plaza, that there were other communities and cultures that were prevalent in the area prior to the Spanish and the Europeans arriving. So I have added a whereas clause that says, whereas for over 12,000 years, people of different cultures have lived in the area today known as Santa Fe, and there is evidence of settlements dating between about AD 600 and 1425 on the Santa Fe Plaza that were inhabited by ancestors of today's Pueblo people. The other thing it does two other things. One, it says that the city manager shall report to the governing body at regular intervals regarding the status of determining the feasibility, including any reports or expert analysis that are produced as part of the feasibility determination. And then the last thing this amendment does is it brings forward whereas clauses and be it further resolved clauses that state that we will go through the process, the state's process under the New Mexico Prehistoric and Historic Sites Preservation Act. We will consult with the SHPO and there are a couple of be it further resolved that say that we'll see with consultation with the SHPO if it's feasible to move the Soldiers Monument. So that'll be a determination under the Historic Preservation Act about whether moving it would be an adverse effect on the plaza and whether there is a prudent or reasonable alternative. I think it also says that while we don't think we have to, we are willing to do that. I did spend a day of the 2 days in the district court trial, and that is possibly one outcome that could come from that court process. When the judge rules, one thing the judge could say is that the city needs to go through that process. If this judge were to rule that way and this resolution passes, we would already be doing that. The judge may say other things. We don't know what else the judge will say, but we'll do what's necessary when we know that. Let's see. I want to take issue with this idea that because there's been only one opinion expressed at the meetings that have been going on. I've been at the Veterans Advisory Board twice. I've been to the Arts Commission. I've been to the Quality of Life Committee. I've been to the Public Works and Public Utilities Committee. I have been to the Finance Committee. Tomorrow night, this will be at the governing body. I have been receiving comments from others in the community who are concerned that putting the monument, they echo what I've just told you. They're concerned that putting it back up is a safety issue. There are some Native Americans who feel unsafe to come in front of these groups. They don't understand why they have to keep testifying. They feel like they've been clear. They have let me know that the Native American people in the Native American community have been clear in and around Santa Fe that they're against the obelisk being put back in the plaza. And I heard from one person that they take issue with this idea that they have to come in front of you, and if they don't perform quote unquote trauma, it's assumed they don't care. And so I just want you to know there are other voices out there. You may not have heard them tonight, but they are in touch with members of the governing body in various ways. I hope and I ask that if you're listening tonight, it is important to be heard. It is important for people to know that there's more than one opinion about what to do with this. I do want the city attorney to talk about, there was in the public comment, there was a question about jurisdiction. I think one of the things that we've heard about jurisdiction is, does the city own this monument? And the city attorney can talk to you a little bit about the analysis and research that she and her office and other city staff people have done that concludes that we do own it. And she has provided a legal analysis, which if you're interested in seeing, I'm happy to forward to you all. And maybe, do you want to take it from here and just talk about that a little bit? I think that's instructive because that keeps coming up, that how can we do something with this when we don't own it? And it is our belief that the city does own it.
Councilor Romero-Worth, I want to thank you for reading the resolution and giving your comments and explanation on that. And I thank you for that. And also, I found it interesting that no one, obviously, the people that were here this evening were all one-sided of one opinion, but there was no one else, objecting. I didn't hear from, obviously, this evening, there was no one here talking to us about why they feel that the obelisk should not be there. But be it as it may, you all came out and you voiced your opinions, and we'll see where this goes this evening. Yes, Attorney McSherry.
Thank you, Chair Rios. I just had a couple of clarifications. The findings of fact and conclusions of law for the litigation are due on Monday. I'm not aware of a timeline being announced by the judge as to what timeline he has put on himself to come to a decision afterwards. It is certainly possible that it could be within 10 to 15 days after that, but we don't have a statement as to that timeline. And then there was a couple other things. The definition of obelisk, so we have to read primarily artistic in nature, which precedes an or before the small description as being, is including the types of things that follow, which includes monuments and boundary markers, et cetera. So obviously we were talking about a monument in name, if not meaning as well. And really the way that it seems what has been done in the code is that things that are really about speech, art, statements of opinion have been excluded from structures and or things that are artistic. So it does seem like that's a reasonable way to read the historic code. Obviously, we don't have any opinions interpreting that, but it does seem like a reasonable policy decision to exclude things that are artistic or speech related and or not traditionally structural from historic structures review, which has certainly been delegated to this board. So I'm not sure how often that's been interpreted or not. Certainly, this is the only time that it came to me that we looked at that. And so that's where we came to that conclusion about objects being excluded from structures, which is what that term is used for in the historic code. In terms of the ownership, so back in 2020, there was a lot of questions about jurisdiction for law enforcement in particular, before the obelisk even came down. So the FBI, the US Attorney, the state, the city were looking at which laws might apply in certain circumstances and who should be the enforcing entity. So the city does have a property manager who works on property ownership on a daily basis with the land use department. I had reached out to him both about the Kit Carson obelisk, which is on federal land, and about the obelisk on the plaza. And in relation to the obelisk on the plaza, the Soldiers Monument, he did do a search of the county clerk's office, which is where he goes for researching property ownership in general, and looked at the history of that property, and concluded that the US patent from 1901 that delegated or that recognized city ownership of most of downtown Santa Fe and of a significant space around Santa Fe as being part of the city's ownership and including all the fixtures associated with that was the document that exists that describes ownership. My staff looked at that as well. We consulted also with the state, see if they had anything else. So that is the document that we're relying on for both the ownership of the plaza and the ownership of the Soldiers Monument. Soldiers Monument was funded by the territorial legislature before the state existed, and the federal government transferred the land, including structures on it, but excluding certain structures such as the federal courthouse to the city before the state became a state. So state became a state in 1912. The patent, the US patent, which was also recognized with a congressional act, was in 1901. So that's where the ownership analysis comes from. Thank you.
Thank you for hearing that rather lengthy presentation of this resolution. It is a complicated issue. There are a lot of factors. There is a lot of emotion around it. And I appreciate your indulgence tonight, and I'm happy to answer your questions as you have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board members, do you have any questions for either Counselor Romero Worth or Attorney McSherry at this moment? Yes.
Pardon me, this would be for the city attorney, perhaps. I have just learned recently that the plaza doesn't have a local historic designation. Is that correct? Local.
Chair Degnan, I'm not aware of one.
So my question would be, how would that impact anything we have to do in gaining permissions or not? As it is on the National Register, we would have to deal with the federal government.
So it is the plaza, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
I mean, and the reason I asked that is because, of course, the monument is in the plaza.
The monument is in the
It
plaza.
should be contained within that designation.
So that is a question that was raised in the court. So the plaza is not described as the significance of the plaza, but it is described along with sidewalks and the trees of the plaza in a general description of the plaza. So there were different sections of the nomination, and the obelisk was not a basis for the nomination as it was nominated decades ago.
So that there would not be any constraint, if you will, in our trying to understand where we can go from here and how we can do that. We don't have to concern ourselves with the fact that the city of Santa Fe has not designated this important, incredible place.
So what the city of Santa Fe could do and then what would happen afterwards, I really can't speak to that tonight. That's not really within the scope of tonight's proposal.
You answered my question, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yes,
I don't
Member
know who-
Mather.
I don't know who to direct this to, but maybe you both can answer this. Is there a backup plan if the National Cemetery says, no, thank you very much?
Madam Chair and members of the board, thank you for that question because I forgot to address that. That was something in the public comment that was brought up. Because the last, if you were to go back and read the last resolution, I think we tried to do too much in one resolution. And so this resolution is pretty narrow in the sense that it's just dealing with what do we do about that box and what's left inside of it. And let's look at what it would take to move it to the National Cemetery. I have not said anything about what would happen next because I feel like that is probably a separate resolution. And we might need some time. I mean, it's going to take some time to pursue this resolution. And so talking about what might come next to me was too much. And this is plenty. And so I think, you know, if it's possible to move it to the National Cemetery, if the National Cemetery will take it, then we can determine what happens next. And as I'm sure you are well aware, there are lots of ideas about that. And I think that's going to be a separate process. I would also just note that I certainly, in making this proposal, am very aware, as the resolution says, about the significance of the National Cemetery. I would note that my aunts and uncles are buried there. I certainly don't want to bring anything to the National Cemetery that would not be proper for those hallowed grounds. And I think there are lots of processes that this would have to go through to make sure that this would be an appropriate thing to do. And so I didn't mention that either. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. So members of this board would like to hear from you in reference to the feasibility of this resolution that we've been talking about this evening, of whether you think it should go forward or not. And if you feel that you need further comments in reference to the obelisk, I feel that this is the time to do them. I see the first person that wants to speak. Yes, Member Beachside.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few questions for Councilor Romero Worth. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you to all the members of the public who came out tonight to speak. I know it's a difficult subject to be heard on, and I appreciate your opinions and taking a stand. I have a few questions just to clarify that I'm understanding what the intent of the resolution is and what we anticipate happening as a result. So I understand that this resolution would allow us to gather some information on whether or not it's feasible to reconstruct the obelisk. Second, it would also gather information on whether or not the obelisk could be moved, and then maybe separately, could it be moved to the National Cemetery? And then in the course of that feasibility study, I think it could also evaluate whether or not it could stay at the plaza just as a feasible option. And I'd appreciate if you let me know if any of that is incorrect.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Member Beachside. This proposal is directed at moving the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery. It's my belief that I don't know, we're spending money to know, we would be spending money to know what's involved in putting it together and what's involved with moving it, with the idea that the end is to move it to the National Cemetery, if they will take it. That's a big question, which we can't do anything about until we ask formally and they go through their process. This resolution does not say anything at this time about putting it back in the center of the plaza. That's not to say that I don't know what the amendments are that are coming. And there may be an amendment that says something about that. To me, that's not necessarily a feasibility question. That's a political question. I think some of the work that's being done that would be done with this resolution would certainly be informative for putting it back if that's the direction the governing body decides to take. But whether it's fees, and I will just say, I think we can put it back together. I think we can move it. I mean, if they could move obelisks from Egypt to London, in the 1600s, 1800s, whenever it was, they did that in less modern times. I'm certain that in modern times with cranes and the various tools we have, that we can do this. It may be costly, and I think that'll be a determination that we'll have to decide once we know more. Is that how we want to, how costly? Can we find other people who might help us with that cost? And is that how we want to spend money? But at this point, this resolution does not, as it stands tonight, does not say anything about putting it back up in the plaza.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that clarification. I think to my point would be that this feasibility study would allow us to have some answers that would be informative to future resolutions, because I think I understand you to say that once this is completed, there's still a need for this governing body to direct the city to take the next steps to actually implement something further than just a study.
Yeah, so this resolution did say that if the relocation is feasible, the city manager shall proceed with proposing budget and contracts to expend funds to remove the fourth plaque and relocate the Soldiers Monument, including steps to preserve, protect, and minimize harm to the plaza. That language was taken out at the Quality of Life Committee. I do have an amendment to bring that back. It is my belief that if, as we go forward, there are other decision points that will naturally happen. If, we can decide we won't approve the contracts. And that's a possibility. We could say if it's too expensive to move the monument, we can vote the contract down that would provide the money to move the monument. If we decide at that point that that's something we don't want to do. I do think it's important that we show we're serious about what this work is leading to. What's the solution that we're trying to get to? And then if we have something a place we're trying to get to, then I think we need to be clear that you can do what's necessary to carry it out if it's a possibility. Now, again, that's a big conversation, I think, and a lot of what the conversation will be about tomorrow night is, what we do with this language that was taken out. Do we put it back in? And the committee that took it out, I think it was a 3-2 vote when we have 8 members. I don't know how that vote will go at this point, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that all makes some sense, and I appreciate the city's effort to move something in any direction as opposed or in contrast to the status quo. And I just want to acknowledge, I think that so many people in the public have had sort of emotional based statements that are extremely valid, that probably require another feasibility study, related to authenticity and what the reconstruction of the obelisk does to its original authenticity, and what the reestablishing it somewhere else does to its sense of history, to the respect of the communities on all sides of this issue. Like, how does the city's action change what people might be feeling in regard to their culture and history and community? And certainly the context, this is more of just a comment. I don't think that just changing the plaques around the plaza will change people's opinions. I think we've sort of come too far in this, since since the destruction of the obelisk to remedy the way people feel about this with just some additional language. I think it's more of an emotional issue than an educational issue. So yeah, I'll just leave my comments there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Beachside. Next member. Member Benvenue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Counselor and City Attorney, and all members of the public that came to speak tonight. It's extraordinarily valuable to hear from everybody. This, of course, is probably the most divisive issue we've experienced in Santa Fe over the last 4 years that I can remember, at least, in decades that I've been here. It's clear that the parties on both sides have really entrenched themselves in some pretty non-negotiable positions. And so I guess I have two general thoughts here about how to proceed. Given that part of our problem, I think, as a board, and I know for me as a board member, is exactly what's being asked of us here tonight. We've sought some clarity on that, but we're in a bit of an awkward position because we're being asked to give feedback on a resolution that's first of all, not what we would normally do, because we normally act in a quasi-judicial capacity and we base our decisions on evidence that's presented to us, in addition to an extensive staff report that provides additional information and analysis to help guide the decision. And here we're really just, in my view, somewhat proceeding as a set of individuals as opposed to a board, and that makes it difficult to know exactly how to proceed. But to the extent that the very narrow issue that's before us is feedback on the proposed resolution as currently amended, my view on that is that that's a fairly simple question to answer. It's hard for me to see how it could ever be detrimental to explore what is and what isn't possible with the monument. If nothing else, that's going to help move the discussion forward, because it can foreclose some of the alternatives that we could spend, that the governing body could spend a long time analyzing for no gain if it turned out that they weren't feasible to begin with. And conversely, it can potentially open up some possibilities by getting more information about what the alternatives might be here. So I really see no reason not to support the resolution as it's stated. The only reason I would see for that would be if it was very clear to the governing body that they did not have majority support for that alternative, no matter what information was gleaned. Then it would seem to be a waste of city resources. But I would hope that the governing body wouldn't be in a place where they would want to make that decision prior to having the additional information that would be uncovered by the very resolution in question. So that, I think, is sort of the easy one that's before us. A study of whether it can be moved. The broader question, though, of whether it should be moved is what really everyone is talking about here tonight. I don't think, well, first of all, I want to just state, if that were before us, I would recuse myself, because I've written rather extensively and publicly on the background of the Soldiers Monument and have given my own personal opinions as to what I think is appropriate for removal or non-removal. And I did that because this was never intended to come back before the board, because we have legal advice that this is an object, not a structure. Therefore, the board doesn't have jurisdiction over that. But now that I have made myself, my opinions known, I would not serve in a quasi-judicial capacity to reach a decision on whether it should or shouldn't be moved. But just in terms of what might be helpful from a preservation standpoint for the governing body in working on this resolution, I would just make a couple of general points about how I would think they would need, or what consideration should be taken into account, again, from a preservation perspective. So the first one would be, I think that the burden really has to fall on whoever is advocating removal of the monument. This is clearly an historic object on our plaza that has significance from multiple different angles in Santa Fe's history. And, we very strongly believe in preservation of Santa Fe's history. So if the pros and cons of moving it are evenly divided, I would say that moving it would be inappropriate, in my opinion. I think that the burden has to be on establishing the rightness, the correctness of moving it as opposed to leaving it in place. And in that regard, I would say there are two preservation considerations that I think are applicable here, and that would be, in my view, the foundation of any decision that would be made as to whether or not that burden is carried by any proponent of moving the obelisk. The first is public safety. It's written into our code that we are allowed to demolish landmark structures, significant structures, historic structures, under certain circumstances. And that's completely consistent with preservation standards nationally and internationally. Normally, the main issue is structural stability. And we've allowed demolition of structures on that basis before, but there's really no reason to limit it to that. Public safety is broader than merely whether the structure is stable. And I think that it would be relatively easy to establish that if a historic structure was a threat to a strong threat to public safety in any other way, such as the opportunity for violence, the opportunity for personal injury that could take place, the possibility of public disruptions that potentially endanger visitors or residents, that would certainly be a grounds, if found again by a preponderance of the evidence, to justify the removal of even a very important historic structure. The second consideration that I think is important would be whether or not a structure or object in this case violates any of the community standards that the municipality is committed to upholding. And I think that's really, to a large extent, what our discussion or the public discussions about this have revolved around. And I could give my personal opinion on that, but really it's a matter, I think, of the governing body ultimately making that decision. Is the continued presence of the monument on the plaza contrary to any of the principles and values that the city has established in the city charter, for example, or elsewhere? Some of those are tolerance, they are equity, they are inclusiveness. Those are literally spelled out in the city charter and elsewhere. And to me, the big question here would be for the governing body, not for this board, would be, does the continued presence of the monument make any individuals or groups of individuals feel that they are lesser class citizens, that they are made vulnerable to other citizens? Are they treated in any other way with less dignity? That would be the question I think needs to be posed here. And this comes up frequently with the Confederate monuments. And that's most preservation organizations, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation, have taken the formal position that if a monument, even a very historic, important monument, if that monument expresses white supremacy in the case of the Confederate monuments, or other aspects of ethnic inferiority or superiority, it is justified to remove them. And so I think that consideration would have to be considered very carefully and evaluated by the governing body in this case. And again, the real question is, who carries the burden on that? It's not enough just to say, it presents inequality to certain members of the public, and you need to establish that that's the case. And we've had plenty of testimony, I think, over the last 4 years, public and otherwise, on that exact point that could be looked into, even if people are no longer willing to testify publicly, which is for reasons I can understand. And so the last point I think should be considered is whether removing the plaque is the so-called offensive plaque is an appropriate solution. So, that has two sides to the same question. One is, should you remove the plaque at all? Because after all, we normally would not allow that on this board. That is falsification of history. That's removal of historic material. That's the very thing that we constantly prohibit. So that's one question. Is it even appropriate if you're going to maintain the monument to remove that historic material and falsify the history in a quite extreme way, since that plaque was part of the meaning of the monument from the time it was first built. For a few months, it wasn't, but as soon as the territorial legislature dictated the terms of the plaques to be put on it, it's been there ever since. So the monument as a monument's never not had that plaque. So you have to consider falsification of history. And then the second issue is, would that help, even if you did do that? If you have decided that the monument does display a message of an offensive message of inferiority towards certain members of our community, which I think seems to be generally admitted by, I think, universally at this point, then the question would be, does removal at this stage cure that problem? And I think that's a very difficult question to answer. The monument, you really need to look at whether the monument, after 150 years of having that message on it, and then the last 50 years of that message being literally protected against change. 50 years ago, there was an effort to take that off, and 50 years ago, and ever since then, this community has adamantly refused to do so. So has to be questioned whether or not removal at this stage, which ironically is only now being accepted because of the toppling of the monument, would actually have the effect of curing the problem, or whether that message is inseparable from the obelisk itself. So those are my general thoughts from kind of a general preservation standard that I think the governing body would need to answer in order to decide how to move forward, at least in the final decision of whether or not it should be actually removed, if it is feasible. Thank you.
Very much for your comments, Member Bienvenue. Other comments? I know you all have them. Yes. Member Degman.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and especially to Councilor Romero Worth and the city attorney. We're happy to have you here to help us guide our way through this difficult discussion. I'm hoping tonight that we don't try to vote on something, because I know I'm new to this board, but I don't know what I'm voting for if I were to vote on a resolution. There are so many amendments that have been added and removed. I also don't have a copy of it in front of me, but that's not your fault. But it seems like it's quite fluid, and that tomorrow the council will have a resolution. I hope it's tight and clear for the council to be able to vote on. But because I do not know what's in and what's out, I'm just making the comment that if we're not voting on some form or fashion of support or not of the resolution, I'm happy about that, because I don't feel I could be intelligent about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Degman. Member Aguilar Medrano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thinking through a lot of things, so please forgive me if I don't speak as clearly as I may usually. I think that's, one of the options we heard tonight is that we could, if we were reached a consensus, we could make a motion for a general recommendation. My concern is that, from hearing a few other board members, while I normally agree, what's the harm in more knowledge and learning more? My concern is that if the city council were to hear that our general recommendation was to move forward with this resolution, is that that is going to be read as we agree with this general direction to pursue this option of relocating the monument. And I feel very strongly that the only appropriate way forward is to restore the obelisk in its current location. So to spend more time and more money, more of the city's resources to explore this option of relocating the obelisk, I only think that's something we should explore if it's something we're willing to accept the end result of, which I am personally am not. I think so much of the issue comes from, this idea of object versus structure, which is kind of besides the point now, but it just doesn't make sense to me here in the definitions that a sign and a TV antenna are considered structures, but the obelisk is not. That really seems to be like one of the heart of the issues to me. I think it should be a structure which would change so much of this conversation. I'm also surprised to hear that the city hasn't yet done a feasibility with structural engineers to see what all entails restoring the obelisk. That just seems like a baseline to me, regardless of whether it'll be moved in the future, knowing how much it would cost, if it's possible, how much it would cost to restore it in place, that will serve as our baseline. Because if it's 3 times as much to relocate it, maybe that will change the conversation. But we don't know that without that kind of baseline information. And I'm really surprised that we don't have that 4 years later. It seems like that would have been like one of the first things done, in my opinion. Just looking at my notes here. So I think, in summary, I would not support the resolution because I don't think the obelisk should be relocated. The only part of the resolution that I would be in favor of is I think there should be a study to figure out, hire the structural engineers, the specialists to figure out what we are working with. Do we have all the pieces? Can they be put back together? Are some going to have to be formed? We need that regardless of what we do. So I feel like that should almost be a separate piece of resolution just so we can make progress forward. But that's the only portion that I would recommend at this time.
Thank you, Member Aguilar Medrano. Member Mather.
I guess above and beyond anything else, I feel like this whole process has just been kicking the can down the road. And I get why no one wants to touch it because it's hot and it's scary and no one wants to make a decision, and I get it. But at some point, we're just going to have to. I don't think a feasibility study is the worst thing in the world. That's about all I got.
Thank you. I have to tell you that the obelisk has been a topic of discussion in my family home for the last 4 years. And I, maybe surprisingly to some of you, have been on the fence on this. And I'll tell you why. I felt that I'm a peace-loving person, and I felt that if we put something back together that is going to be offensive to any part of our community, that perhaps we should really look at that. And this is my first opinion, to put the obelisk back together, but perhaps move it elsewhere and maybe to a museum, because history has to stay alive. However, tonight, before this meeting, I was having another discussion, same discussion with family members. And I have come to the conclusion for me that the obelisk should remain in the plaza. Whether you call it an object, whether you call it a site, or you call it a structure, this monument has been in the plaza for over 150 years. It is something that represents, it is giving adulation to soldiers that have fought in 2 battles. And yes, it had offensive language. That word savages was chiseled out of there in the 1970s. I, as a person that was born and raised here, and by the way, on my mother's side of the family, we go back, way back, right here in this very community. And before malls, we'd go downtown and I would see the monument. Did I know as a child what it stood for? No, but you become attached to something that has been there forever. But in the 70s, when I was older and the word savages was chiseled out, then I became aware of what that monument stood for. The 2 things, that it was honoring the soldiers that fought in the Civil War on the Union side. And also, then later on, the territorial legislature decided to also honor the cavalry that fought against certain Indian tribes. And as I believe that I have read the history, that it wasn't Pueblo Indians. It was the Apaches, the Comanches, the Navajos. But it's honoring people that have fought for certain beliefs, correct? I'm way more of a dove than a hawk, let me tell you. But in some instances, unfortunately, we have to fight, we have to defend ourselves in certain instances. If somebody is fighting against you for whatever you own or whatever you represent, are you going to stand there and take it? I doubt it. So tonight, prior to this meeting, I came to the conclusion for myself that I felt that that monument should remain there. It is part of our history. Now, regarding the language of that monument, I don't know, I would rather feel that, yes, as some of our members said, that preservationists would probably fight for the present language, but if it's offensive, things are changing. We're 2024. Think about how far back that was put on. I think it's important to be conciliatory, to not be offensive. You know what? The beautiful thing is that we in this community have lived with our fellow Pueblo Indians, the Anglos, whomever you are. I think we're a very welcoming community. And another thing that I heard today is that, interestingly enough, whether it was hearsay or fact, I heard that the Pueblos are in opposition to getting that monument moved. That's what I heard today as well. So that entered into my decision. So I am with member Aguilar Medrano. I feel that if this board supports the resolution, in essence, you are telling the city council, we support this resolution. So we do want you to, you do have our permission to look into moving that monument. But in a way, the underlying words are, yeah, we support you moving that monument. Even though John said the study is if it can be moved, or the other word, it should be moved. And I just feel that if you are advocating for this particular resolution, then you're saying, okay, I support moving that monument. And I have come for me not to move that monument. It has been in our city and it's an important part of that plaza, regardless of what you call it. It has been there for over 150 years, and I feel that it should continue to be there. So for me, I'm saying I do not support the resolution. So let me see a show of hands. Just how many people on this board do support the resolution and feel that it should go forward? 2 people, 3 people? And how many feel that it should not go forward? You see, 3 and 3. So I felt that this evening, unless board members express otherwise, I felt that you all heard our comments and they should go forward as such instead of making a motion. And besides, it was 3 and 3.
Madam Chair,
Any other comments? Yes.
I think I would like to get more information from what happens tomorrow at the city council meeting before we, keep talking about this. I just want to hear what they have to say as well. I just feel like it'd be a lot more information. Be helpful.
Well, I think the city council, they're trying to get information from boards and commissions and committees to see where they can move. So I do have to say thank you to you and to other city council members that are trying to move forward with something that has been going on in this community for 4 años, for 4 years, correct? So I think all of us want a resolution to this. So if no one has anything further to say, John, it looks like you're praying. What's going on?
I'm thinking, I'm in deep thought.
Yes.
No, well, just to comment on what you said, I agree at this point, there'd really be no purpose to having a motion, although it would carry apparently because you'd be non-voting, but I don't think that would mean anything.
Oh, thanks for bringing that.
But I just don't see how
I
that
don't
would.
vote except in case
I don't
of
know
a
how that
tie,
would
but,
provide any additional
you know.
information for the governing body's deliberations tomorrow than if they just heard what we individually had to say and know that there was a difference of opinion on the board. So I'm in agreement with
Yeah.
not having a motion in this case and just having the comments that were made stand for what they're worth.
So I just wish this community, us, good luck in this. Everyone that's involved in the process of the city council trying to go forward on this, gathering information from everyone in the community. And obviously, thank goodness, in Spanish we say, cada cabeza es un mundo. Everyone thinks for themselves. Good thing, good thing that everyone does think for themselves and that we all have differing opinions. And that is good. And I know that there will be a resolution to this, and I hope that sooner than later. And we have to keep our fingers crossed because unfortunately we live in a world today where things are expressed, and many times they're expressed in the form of violence, and we all know that. And if that obelisk should go back, it doesn't matter if it goes back to wherever it might be put, we hope that it will not be destroyed again. And that was one of my concerns of not having it in the downtown area. I thought, well, in a museum, it would appear to me to be more protected. But so really, I wish the city good luck. So if there's nothing further to say, Member Benvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in terms of feedback, I did want to point out, I think there's what I would consider a erroneous statement in the whereas clause on page 3, where it states, whereas the Soldiers Monument's purpose is distinct from the plazas, et cetera. And then it says, the monument was funded and erected on federal land to recognize local veterans. And I do think that's misleading because it was the vast majority of the veterans that fought in the 4 battles were not New Mexicans, but were primarily Colorado volunteers. And the vast majority of those who died were not New Mexicans, but Colorado volunteers. So it's just, I just think there's some misinformation, and I don't think that's determinative one way or the other by any stretch of the imagination. I think New Mexican volunteers in the Civil War battles are eminently worthy of having a monument and worthy of respect, regardless of what happens to this particular monument. So that's not intended to suggest anything about that. But it is important, I think, that the territorial legislature was led by John Slough, who was the leader of the Colorado Volunteers, and it was really his regiment that he was intending to honor.
So let me throw this up. Is it possible to, if we, city council, if we as a community decide to just change the language of the plaques, is that possible? Is that not possible? Could we honor all veterans that have served in wars that include all kinds of people within our community? You know? Something else to, anyway. Okay, so members of this body, any other matters from the board? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one miscellaneous question for staff. The house at 525 East Alameda that has the wall was demolished and new wall has been put up. I just have a question about the height, if the staff has been able to confirm that the current height was allowed. It's over 6 feet tall from the sidewalk, and it did change the streetscape quite a bit. It looks out of place. I'm hoping there might be an opportunity to intervene.
We'll take a look at that. And it has been approved, but it shouldn't have been over 6 feet tall. But we'll take a look at it. We'll send an inspector out to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you, Gary. And I guess the other question, a part of a bigger conversation, how came up tonight that the plaza does not have a significant status from this board. Seems like something we should explore. And I know we just recently talked about whether board members have the authority to request a statusing review.
We do. We do. I believe it's the city council, board members, and owners of the property, if I'm correct.
Yeah, then, I mean, we can have a conversation about it, but then I think I would be interested in making a motion for that. I don't see any harm. Seems like it could only help at this point. And I'm shocked to learn that one doesn't exist.
The question would be whether or not we have authority to designate the plaza, which is a place, as opposed to a structure. We would just need a legal opinion on that.
So that, Member Aguilar-Medrano, were you wanting to make that motion this evening or for further discussion in maybe, in an upcoming meeting?
I would love to hear from Frank, if I can make a motion.
Well, something like this would have to be placed on an agenda. Madam Chair and Member Aguilar-Medrano, we certainly can't make a motion about something like that, without it being on the agenda and it being publicly noticed in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. But one thing I can tell you is from looking at the code under subsection 14-5.2 subsection C, the Historic District Review Board has the authority to designate structures within historic districts, and they have to be designated a status of significant contributing or non-contributing. I don't see that a piece of land can receive a designation or designation.
But we can designate structures.
That is correct.
So could I, in theory, request a statusing of the obelisk?
Secondly.
I think that is something you'd have to ask that to be made an agenda item. We'd have to.
Okay.
Yeah. But my belief is that that there is an intention in the code to remove monuments from the definition of structures.
I think that's under objects.
Well, those definitions were described to the board earlier, and those are the definitions we have.
So Frank, what would be the process for getting something like that on the agenda? Can I make that request tonight for that to be on for a future agenda?
I think you would have to discuss that with the staff. I would discuss it with the staff and at some point, other than in an open meeting such as this, because this isn't on the agenda.
Did you have something?
I was just going to suggest that I think we've made requests in the past for a legal interpretation of an issue. So I think that it would be appropriate without a motion just to request that legal staff provide an assessment about whether or not we could status the plaza. Is that something that's allowed under our code in our jurisdiction?
I agree. That's what I was going to say as well, or the obelisk as an individual structure or object, as the case may be. We might as well lay that matter to rest. It's been going on as long as for 4 years now. Whether or not the board has any authority over the plaza and the obelisk, we might as well get a formal opinion given to us.
Madam Chair and Member Bienvenue, I believe you can make that request, but to make it now in this meeting at a time when it hasn't been placed on the agenda, and then you're also depending on what specifically you're asking. Are you asking me to do research like right now, look at the code and look at case law and look at, it would require research from the city attorney's office.
I think that's what everyone has in mind, to report back in the future.
So if you want to put a matter like that on the agenda or make a request to the city attorney's office, then you can do that.
I think she's trying to make that request right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess I
don't think that is something that is on comment. I think that's, excuse me. I think that's a very permissible thing to do.
talked about it for the Vladam building before requesting
Exactly.
a status review. So same thing, just.
I understand that the board can ask the staff to place it on the agenda to do a status review, in which case there's a packet that's submitted to the board, and the same as any property owner comes before the board and asks for a status review. It is in the code that my understanding is anybody can ask for a status review.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think she's just, I think what we're spinning around here is before she knows before the board knows whether to ask for a status review, there's the preliminary question of can this even be statused? So there seems to be a legal issue involved in the request that we need an answer to. Now, if you just want to do those simultaneously and we just say, yeah, put that on the agenda in the future, and then you can report back as to whether that's appropriate or inappropriate.
I believe the answer to that is going to be found in subsection C. Madam Chair and Member Bienvenue, I don't see anything inappropriate about it. I believe the answer is found in 14-5.2C. That's going to be subsection 2C, initiation of review of status designation. The board may review the status designation of a structure in response to the following, and there's little 1, little 2, and little 3, and 1 is a request initiated by the city. Staff shall notify the property owner prior to initiating the request. So,
and by inappropriate is you could make a preliminary decision that we can't have a status review because this is an object, not a structure. So that code section doesn't apply. That's what we're trying to get an answer to, because we've been told up until now by the city attorney's office that we have no jurisdiction over the obelisk because it's an object, not a structure. So I guess we're just trying to find out, can we get something to tell us that that's actually the firm opinion? So there'd be no point in asking to have it put on an agenda for a status review because.
Madam Chair and Member Bienvenue, I don't see that you're going to get a different answer from what you got from the city attorney tonight. Because it is a matter that we have discussed, and it's a matter that I've looked over the definitions in the code as well, and I don't see any reason to. Sometimes we have lively discussions about what the code means, but I don't see any reason to disagree with her in this, because that's what the definition reads.
Right.
And I do think that this is, you look at the history of this board, it was called a Historic Design Review Board. In fact, it's still referred to as a Historic Design Review Board some places in the code. I believe it is the intention of the board to review designs for historic structures, meaning.
But it was changed from Historic Design Review Board to Historic Districts Review Board to indicate that does something contribute to the district? Does the obelisk contribute to the district? Does the plaza contribute to the district?
May
Obviously,
I interject something
sí,
here?
señor. Yes, it does.
We do have objects that are contributing, including curbstones, bridges. They are contributing and significant building structures within the historic districts.
We could debate all night over this issue. We're really just, my view is always if the city attorney reaches a decision on the interpretation of the code, we abide by that. So if that's a final determination, I think that's the end of story. But I do think that, it is a bit of an open question because we don't really know where that definition of object came from, first of all.
We don't.
I mean, who added that? Did they have authority to add that definition? I don't know where it came from, if the governing body approved it. And number two, the language of it is quite specific. It says object as used in the historic ordinance shall not mean such and such, but object is not used in the ordinance except in one place relating to compounds. So I think are some legitimate questions, but I certainly wouldn't debate that with the city attorney. In my view, if that's her settled opinion, we're done.
Well,
And guess what? We're in the middle of a rewrite.
Right.
Well,
definitions are part of the rewrite.
Yeah, so that could be cleared up, but you understand what I'm getting at? I'm just
I
really
do.
saying there's this preliminary legal issue here.
Sure.
I think I've already heard what the city's view is. I'm perfectly fine abiding by that, but there just seems to be continued confusion about it that would be nice to lay to rest once and for all.
Well, Madam Chair and Member Bienvenue, as I said, I mean, I agree with, if we apply the literal definition, we're talking about sculptures, monuments, boundary markers, statuary, and fountains. And I recall a discussion that I had with my boss, and I think part of it is that historic structure, the significance is somebody's house, it's where somebody lives, and it has to meet the needs of the owners to a certain degree while still complying with a particular design standard. However, a monument, statuary, fountains, that sort of thing, have a larger significance in the sense that they designate something for all the citizenry of the city. It's supposed to mean something not just to the person who owns that, or the person who lives there, but to everybody who sees that is going to attach some historic or sentimental significance to it in a way that a specific house or a specific building does not. And I believe that for that reason, the Historic District Review Board doesn't necessarily speak for everybody. That I think that was kind of the one of the reasoning, one of the
Discussion
going
could
around
go
the circle.
on and on,
I
but-
just think that if that's the city attorney's position, fine. I think it should just be clearly conveyed, and maybe it already has been. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I was just going to make a proposal to get us out of here tonight so we can all go home. But Gary, could this serve as my official request for a status review of the obelisk? And then if city staff finds that we're not able to do that because city attorney has identified it as an object, and then that will be the end of it. But at least At least then we have it in record that it's something we requested and that it has been definitively determined to be an object and therefore not possible.
I second the motion.
If there's a motion, it don't have to be placed on an agenda.
But
Madam-
I think she's just making a request.
Yeah, just like
Not
when
a
we
formal motion.
just like when we've requested a status request for other buildings and
Yeah, members of the board, let me
for a future agenda.
take a look into that and see, and we'll get back with you on that.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
Any other matters from the board at this time? Here's not. I do want to thank you, board members.
I'm sorry, I have a
Yes,
question.
hi, Lanny.
Member Aguilar Medrano, does your request also include statusing of the plaza itself?
I would love city staff to explore if that's possible. Yes.
Thank you. Any other matters from this board at this moment? It appears not. Okay, our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, October the 8th. And do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Aguilar Medrano seconds.
And roll call vote, please.
Member Mather,
Yes.
Member Biesheup,
Yes.
Member Degnan,
Yes.
Member Aguilar Medrano.
Yes.